The massive ships appeared without warning above Earth's major cities on a Tuesday morning in 2157. Jake Morrison was drinking his coffee at the Earth Defense Force Command Center when every alarm in the building started screaming at once. The ships were huge, each one the size of Manhattan, their dark metal hulls blocking out the sun over New York, London, Tokyo, and 50 other cities around the world. Lisa Harper was in her lab at the Global Research Institute when her assistant burst through the door with wide eyes and shaking hands. The young man could barely speak as he pointed at the wall screen showing the alien vessels hovering motionless in Earth's atmosphere. Lisa dropped her coffee cup and watched it shatter on the floor as the reality hit her. They were not alone in the universe, and their visitors did not look friendly. Steve Collins had been admiral of Earth's small space fleet for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. From his orbital command station, he could see the alien fleet clearly through the observation deck. There were hundreds of ships of different sizes, arranged in perfect formation around each mothership. They moved with a precision that spoke of military discipline and advanced technology far beyond anything humans possessed. The first communication came exactly 1 hour after the ships arrived. Every screen, every radio, every communication device on Earth suddenly displayed the same image. A tall creature with pale blue skin and 4 arms stood before what looked like a command throne. Its eyes were completely black, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Supreme Commander Vex High of the Zephyrian Empire. Your world has been selected for integration into our domain. We have conquered 847 worlds using the same process we will now apply to yours. You have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally, or we will demonstrate why resistance is futile." The alien's image disappeared and was replaced by recordings from other worlds. Humans watched in horror as city after city was reduced to ash by weapons that seemed to turn matter itself into energy. Entire populations knelt before Zephyrian forces while their leaders signed surrender documents with trembling hands. The message was clear and terrifying. Jake Morrison gathered his staff in the main briefing room as reports flooded in from around the world. Military bases were reporting strange energy readings from the alien ships. Several fighter squadrons had attempted to approach the vessels, but had been turned back by invisible barriers that stopped their aircraft dead in the air without damaging them. The aliens were demonstrating their power without even trying. Lisa Harper found herself appointed to the emergency council that formed within hours of the invasion. World leaders were calling for immediate surrender, while others demanded military action. The arguments grew heated as the reality of their situation became clear. Earth's most powerful weapons might as well be throwing rocks at mountains for all the good they would do against technology. This advanced Maria Santos had been out of the military for 5 years, but her special forces training kicked in the moment. The aliens appeared. She began contacting old friends and colleagues, people who knew how to fight and how to organize. If Earth's leaders were going to surrender without a fight, then someone needed to prepare for what came after. She had studied enough history to know that occupying armies always had weaknesses. The second demonstration came 12 hours later. 3 military installations were selected seemingly at random. The aliens fired single beams of purple light from their ships, and the bases simply vanished. Not destroyed, not bombed, but completely erased as if they had never existed. The grass underneath was perfectly green and undisturbed. 10,000 soldiers and support staff gone without a trace. Steve Collins watched the recordings of the attacks over and over, trying to understand what kind of weapon could do such a thing. His science teams had no answers. The energy readings suggested the aliens could manipulate matter at the atomic level, but that should have been impossible, according to everything humans knew about physics. These beings operated by rules that Earth's scientists did not even understand. Emergency meetings continued around the clock as the deadline approached. Most world leaders wanted to surrender immediately. They argued that resistance would only lead to more death and destruction. The aliens had made their power clear, and fighting them would be like ants trying to stop a boot from crushing their hill. But Lisa Harper stood up in the final council meeting and spoke with a voice that cut through the fear and panic. She reminded everyone that throughout human history people had faced impossible odds and found ways to survive. She talked about the human spirit that refused to kneel even when kneeling seemed like the only rational choice. Her words struck something deep in the hearts of those who heard them. Jake Morrison found himself nodding as Lisa spoke. His grandfather had fought in wars where victory seemed impossible, but humans had found a way. Steve Collins thought about the crews under his command who had signed up to defend Earth even knowing they might face threats beyond imagination. Maria Santos smiled grimly as she listened because she recognized the sound of someone choosing to fight rather than surrender as the 72-hour deadline approached. The world's leaders made their final decision. The response was broadcast on every frequency the aliens had used for their ultimatum. It was not a surrender or a plea for mercy. Jake Morrison stood before the cameras and spoke for all humanity with words that would echo through history, and we have received your ultimatum, and we have an answer. We are humans, and we do not kneel to anyone or anything. If you want our world, you will have to take it from us. Come and try. The transmission ended, and the waiting began. Supreme Commander Vex High stared at the human transmission with something approaching confusion. In 847 previous conquests, no species had ever responded to the final ultimatum with defiance. Most surrendered after the first demonstration of Zephyrian power. The few that tried to resist usually lasted less than a day before their leaders came forward, with white flags and trembling voices. Jake Morrison launched Earth's defense fleet exactly 1 hour after delivering humanity's response. 200 ships lifted off from bases around the world and accelerated toward the alien formation. The vessels were small compared to the Zephyrian motherships, but they moved with purpose and determination that surprised the alien observers. The first space battle began at 800 hours Greenwich Mean Time. Jake led his squadron in a direct assault on the nearest alien destroyer while other human ships spread out to attack from multiple angles. The Zephyrians expected the humans to engage in traditional formation flying like every other species they had conquered, but the Earth ships broke apart and came at them from directions that made no tactical sense. Lisa Harper coordinated the battle from the Emergency Command Center deep beneath Geneva. She watched the tactical displays as human pilots ignored every rule of space combat that civilized species followed. They used their ships as weapons, ramming alien vessels when their missiles ran out. They hid behind asteroids and attacked when the enemy least expected it. They fought like wild animals instead of trained soldiers. The aliens had superior technology, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to fight fair. Human ships darted between the massive Zephyrian vessels like angry wasps, striking at weak points and disappearing before return fire could lock onto them. Jake Morrison led his pilots in maneuvers that violated basic physics as understood by alien military doctrine. Maria Santos watched the space battle from her hidden base in the Colorado mountains while simultaneously coordinating resistance cells in major cities around the world. She had spent the last 3 days organizing civilians into fighting units and preparing for ground combat. The aliens would win the space battle eventually, but they would find Earth's surface much harder to conquer. Steve Collins commanded the defense from his flagship as it dodged between alien energy beams that could vaporize a city block. His ship was damaged and half his crew was dead, but he kept fighting because surrender was not an option. When his main weapons failed, he ordered his remaining fighters to ram the alien command ship's bridge. The Zephyrians lost their first ship when Jake Morrison's squadron focused all their fire on a single destroyer's engine core. The explosion lit up space like a small sun and sent shockwaves through the alien fleet. For the first time in their military history, the Zephyrians had lost a vessel to a species they were supposed to be conquering. Vex-High demanded an immediate report from his tactical officers. How had primitive humans managed to destroy one of his ships when species with far more advanced technology had fallen without inflicting any damage at all? The answer came back in words that no Zephyrian commander had ever heard before. The humans were unpredictable. The battle continued for 18 hours as human ships used tactics that bordered on insanity. They flew their vessels into asteroid fields where the larger alien ships could not follow. They used the gravity wells of planets to slingshot around and attack from unexpected angles. They coordinated their attacks using communication methods. The aliens could not intercept or decode. Lisa Harper realized something important as she studied the alien response patterns. The Zephyrians were incredibly advanced, but they fought according to strict rules and protocols. Every ship movement followed predictable patterns based on military doctrine that had been refined over thousands of years. They could not adapt quickly to enemies who ignored those same rules. Human casualties were heavy, but every ship that died took alien crew members with them. Jake Morrison's original squadron of 24 fighters was reduced to 3 survivors, but they had crippled an entire alien battle group. The Zephyrians were winning, but they were paying a price they had never expected to pay. The aliens adapted their tactics after losing a second destroyer to a coordinated human suicide attack. They began using their energy weapons to create kill zones that human ships could not penetrate. The space battle turned into a siege as Earth's remaining vessels found themselves trapped between alien forces and the planet's atmosphere. But the humans had been preparing for this moment. Steve Collins activated the hidden weapon platforms that had been disguised as communication satellites. These platforms launched waves of kinetic projectiles at the alien ships, while defense stations on Luna opened fire with railguns that had been secretly constructed over the past decade. Maria Santos received the signal she had been waiting for as the space battle reached its climax. All across Earth, resistance cells activated simultaneously. They did not target the alien ships directly, but instead focused on disrupting the landing zones that orbital reconnaissance had identified. Bridges were destroyed, airports were cratered, and potential staging areas were turned into killing fields. The Zephyrians expected to begin their ground invasion within hours of defeating Earth's space fleet, but found their carefully planned landing sites rendered unusable. They were forced to improvise landing zones while human resistance fighters harassed their scout ships with weapons that should not have been able to penetrate alien armor. Lisa Harper smiled grimly as reports came in from around the world. The humans were losing the space battle, but they were making the aliens pay for every kilometer of conquered territory. More importantly, they were forcing the Zephyrians to fight a type of war that their military doctrine had never encountered. Vex-High stared at the tactical displays showing human resistance continuing even after their space fleet had been destroyed. Every other species had surrendered once their orbital defenses fell, but the humans seemed to be just getting started. His intelligence officers reported that instead of concentrating their forces for a final desperate battle, the humans had scattered into small groups that were impossible to target effectively. The first Zephyrian landing ships touched down on Earth's surface to find that the humans had abandoned their cities and retreated into terrain that favored defenders over attackers. Forests had been turned into maze-like killing fields, while urban areas had been booby-trapped and evacuated. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stand still and be conquered. Jake Morrison ejected from his crippled fighter as it crashed into the Pacific Ocean, knowing that his sacrifice had bought Earth precious time. Lisa Harper received his final transmission as she coordinated the global resistance from her underground bunker. The captain's last words were simple, but they captured the spirit that was keeping humanity fighting against impossible odds. Tell them we're just getting started. The Zephyrian ground forces landed expecting to face organized military resistance and instead found empty cities and silent streets. Major population centers had been evacuated in an operation that took months of secret preparation. Maria Santos had learned from studying historical guerrilla campaigns that controlling territory meant nothing if the enemy refused to defend it. 3 months into the invasion, the aliens controlled every major city on Earth but found themselves ruling over empty buildings and abandoned infrastructure. The human population had melted away into countryside, mountains, and underground facilities that had been prepared in advance. Every day brought new attacks from enemies who appeared without warning and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Lisa Harper worked from a command center built into an old mine shaft 2 kilometers beneath the Rocky Mountains. Her team of scientists had been studying captured alien technology and making discoveries that changed everything humans thought they knew about physics. The Zephyrians used quantum manipulation to power their weapons, but their technology followed patterns that could be understood and copied. Steve Collins had survived the destruction of his flagship and now commanded human resistance forces from a mobile base that moved constantly to avoid alien detection. His remaining ships operated from hidden asteroid bases and struck at Zephyrian supply convoys before disappearing into the deep space between planets. The aliens had superior numbers, but humans knew their own solar system better. The breakthrough came when Maria Santos led a raid on an alien supply depot and captured intact equipment along with several Zephyrian prisoners. The aliens had expected humans to torture captives for information, but instead found themselves treated according to Geneva Convention protocols that confused and surprised them. Some prisoners began cooperating simply because they had never encountered enemies who showed mercy. Lisa Harper discovered that Zephyrian technology relied heavily on standardized components that could be reverse-engineered once humans understood the basic principles. The aliens had perfected their tools over thousands of years, but had lost the ability to innovate quickly. They were masters of efficiency, but strangers to adaptation. Jake Morrison had been rescued from the Pacific by a submarine that had been hiding beneath the ocean for months. He found himself commanding a new type of warfare as human engineers began combining salvaged alien technology with Earth-built systems. The hybrid weapons that resulted were crude compared to pure Zephyrian equipment, but they worked and could be manufactured in hidden factories. The aliens established their main command base in what had been New York City, but found themselves under constant harassment from human fighters who used the abandoned subway tunnels and sewer systems to move, unseen beneath the streets. Every patrol that ventured underground disappeared or returned with casualties that could not be explained. Supreme Commander Vex High received reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about conquest operations. The humans were not weakening after months of occupation, but seemed to be growing stronger. Their attacks were becoming more sophisticated and their weapons more effective. Species were supposed to break under the weight of superior force, not adapt and improve. Maria Santos coordinated with resistance cells around the world using communication networks that the aliens could not penetrate. Human signals were hidden in natural radio noise and disguised as routine transmissions that appeared completely harmless to Zephyrian monitoring systems. The resistance had learned to think like prey animals that needed to stay invisible to survive. The first major victory came when Steve Collins led a combined space and ground assault on a Zephyrian mining operation on the Moon. Human forces used captured alien shuttles to approach undetected while resistance fighters on Luna sabotaged the base from within. The operation freed 300 human prisoners and captured enough equipment to arm 10 new resistance cells. Lisa Harper made another crucial discovery when analyzing Zephyrian command protocols. The aliens relied on centralized control systems that assumed absolute loyalty from subordinate units. Their entire military structure would collapse if key command nodes were eliminated because lower-ranked soldiers were not trained to think independently or adapt to changing circumstances. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces became obvious as casualty reports mounted. Alien soldiers had expected to garrison a conquered world with minimal resistance, but instead found themselves fighting an enemy that could strike anywhere at any time. Morale problems began appearing in units that had never experienced sustained combat against determined opponents. Jake Morrison led a team of engineers in developing new tactics specifically designed to exploit alien weaknesses. Human fighters began using swarm attacks that overwhelmed Zephyrian defensive systems through sheer numbers of targets. They learned to coordinate their movements so that destroying one attacking unit would cause minimal disruption to the overall assault. The turning point came when human forces successfully destroyed their first alien command ship. Maria Santos had infiltrated the vessel using captured Zephyrian uniforms, while Jake Morrison led a diversionary attack that drew defenders away from critical systems. The explosion that followed lit up the night sky over what had been Chicago and sent shockwaves through the alien occupation force. Vexhai demanded explanations from his surviving officers as reports came in of increasing human effectiveness. His tactical advisors had no answers that made sense within Zephyrian military doctrine. The humans were supposed to be a primitive species easily overwhelmed by superior technology, but they kept finding ways to turn that same technology against its creators. Steve Collins received intelligence from alien defectors who had become disillusioned with the occupation. These Zephyrians revealed that their empire had never faced a species that refused to accept defeat. Every previous conquest had followed the same pattern of initial resistance, followed by rapid collapse and submission. Humans were writing a completely different story. The resistance began receiving support from unexpected sources as alien soldiers started questioning orders that seemed increasingly pointless. Some Zephyrians had joined their military to explore the galaxy and spread their civilization, but found themselves trapped in an endless guerrilla war against enemies who would not surrender. Lisa Harper realized that humanity had achieved something remarkable in just 6 months of fighting. They had not only survived initial conquest, but had forced the Zephyrian Empire to commit more resources to Earth than they had ever spent on any previous invasion. The aliens were winning individual battles but losing the war of attrition. Maria Santos stood in the ruins of what had been Denver and watched human fighters training with weapons that combined Earth engineering with alien technology. 6 months ago, these people had been teachers, farmers, shop owners, and students. Now they were soldiers in a war that would determine whether humanity would survive as a free species. The message that went out to resistance cells around the world was simple, but it carried hope that had been missing since the invasion began. The aliens could be beaten. Their technology could be copied and improved. Their tactics could be countered, and their weaknesses exploited. Humanity was not just surviving the Zephyrian occupation. They were learning to fight back. 1 year after the invasion began, humanity was no longer just surviving but actively hunting Zephyrian forces across the solar system. Lisa Harper had established secret factories in asteroid belt mining stations where human engineers worked around the clock to produce hybrid weapons that combined the best of both technologies. The new equipment was crude compared to pure alien manufacturing, but it could be built quickly and repaired in the field. Jake Morrison commanded a fleet of void fighters that barely resembled the ships he had led in the first desperate battle. These new vessels used human engineering principles combined with captured Zephyrian technology to create something entirely unique. They were fast enough to outrun alien interceptors and heavily armed enough to punch through energy shields that had once seemed impenetrable. The breakthrough in manufacturing came when Maria Santos captured an entire alien factory ship during a daring raid on Jupiter's moons. The vessel contained complete technical specifications for Zephyrian equipment, along with automated systems that could be reprogrammed to produce hybrid designs. Human engineers spent weeks learning to operate machinery that worked according to principles they barely understood. Steve Collins had transformed Earth's scattered resistance into a coordinated military force capable of launching simultaneous operations across multiple worlds. His commanders used tactics that seemed impossible to alien observers, who expected enemies to fight according to established rules of engagement. Human forces appeared where they were least expected and vanished, before counterattacks could be organized. The first major victory came when human forces recaptured Luna Base, using a combination of stealth infiltration and overwhelming firepower. Jake Morrison led his Void Fighters in a diversionary attack that drew alien defenders away from the main assault, while Maria Santos led ground forces through maintenance tunnels that the occupiers had not bothered to secure. Lisa Harper analyzed the captured base and made discoveries that changed everything about the war effort. Zephyrian control systems were incredibly sophisticated, but they depended on constant communication with command ships in orbit. Cut those communication links and entire alien units would become paralyzed while waiting for new orders from superior officers. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces became impossible to ignore as defeat followed defeat in battles they should have won easily. Alien soldiers who had expected easy garrison duty found themselves fighting enemies who seemed to know their every move in advance. Some units began refusing orders to patrol areas where human resistance was particularly active. Supreme Commander Vexhai received reports that challenged everything he thought he knew about military science. Human forces were not just copying Zephyrian technology, but improving it in ways that defied logic. Their hybrid weapons often outperformed the original designs because human engineers were not constrained by thousands of years of established doctrine. The tide of war began shifting when Steve Collins launched Operation Defiance, a coordinated assault on alien strongholds around the world. Instead of attacking one target at a time, human forces struck everywhere simultaneously, using tactics that spread Zephyrian defenders too thin to mount effective resistance. The aliens had more troops, but humans had learned to make better use of the forces they possessed. Maria Santos led the assault that recaptured the ruins of New York City in a battle that lasted 3 days and nights. Human fighters used the destroyed buildings as cover, while alien forces found themselves trapped in urban terrain that favored defenders over attackers. The victory sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian command structure because it proved that humans could retake territory once thought permanently lost. Jake Morrison discovered that Void Fighters could be used for more than just space combat when he led successful raids on alien positions throughout the solar system. The ships were fast enough to reach any target within days and carried enough firepower to cripple installations that had been considered invulnerable. Zephyrian bases that had operated safely for months suddenly found themselves under attack. Intelligence breakthrough came when Lisa Harper's team successfully decoded Zephyrian communication protocols and began intercepting alien military traffic. Human forces could now predict enemy movements hours or even days in advance, while their own communications remained hidden in quantum noise that Zephyrian sensors could not detect. Alien morale collapsed completely when human forces began targeting Zephyrian supply lines throughout the solar system. Ships carrying food, weapons, and replacement troops found themselves ambushed by Void Fighters that appeared without warning and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. The invasion force that had seemed unstoppable a year earlier was now struggling to maintain basic logistics. The first alien defections began when Zephyrian soldiers realized they were fighting an unwinnable war against enemies who grew stronger with each passing month. Some defectors provided intelligence, while others actively joined human resistance cells, using their knowledge of alien tactics and technology to strike more effectively against their former comrades. Steve Collins coordinated the liberation of Australia in a campaign that demonstrated how much human military capabilities had improved. The operation used advanced hybrid weapons, coordinated air and space support, and psychological warfare techniques that left alien defenders demoralized and confused. The continent was freed in just 2 weeks of fighting. Maria Santos established training camps where former alien prisoners taught human fighters how to use captured Zephyrian equipment more effectively. The strange sight of aliens and humans working together sent a powerful message to both species about the possibility of cooperation replacing conquest. Some Zephyrians began questioning the very foundations of their empire. The breakthrough that changed everything came when Jake Morrison's engineers successfully reverse-engineered Zephyrian faster-than-light travel technology. Suddenly, human forces could strike at alien positions anywhere in the solar system within hours rather than weeks. The strategic advantage that had kept Zephyrian forces supplied and reinforced disappeared overnight. Lisa Harper coordinated the construction of the first human starship capable of interstellar travel using a combination of Earth engineering and captured alien technology. The vessel was a hybrid design that looked like nothing either species had built before, but it could travel between stars and carry enough firepower to threaten any target. The momentum of war had shifted completely by the time human forces began their assault on the main Zephyrian command base. What had started as a desperate struggle for survival had become a coordinated campaign to drive the invaders completely off Earth and out of the solar system. The aliens who had expected easy conquest now faced the very real possibility of total defeat. Supreme Commander Vexhai stared at tactical displays showing human forces advancing on multiple fronts, while his own units retreated or switched sides entirely. The species he had dismissed as primitive had taught themselves to fight more effectively than soldiers who had trained for centuries. They had turned the art of war into something he no longer recognized, the final message that went out to all. Human resistance cells was simple, but it carried the weight of impossible victory. Earth would be free within months rather than years. The Zephyrian occupation was collapsing under the weight of human determination and innovation. The species that had refused to kneel was about to make their enemies fall. 2 years after the invasion began, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of humanity's first interstellar warship as it emerged from faster-than-light travel near the Zephyrian home system. The vessel was a hybrid of human engineering and alien technology that represented everything humanity had learned about war and survival. Behind him followed a fleet of similar ships carrying human crews and alien defectors united in a single purpose. Lisa Harper had become Earth's first ambassador to the galaxy, but she carried that title while coordinating military operations that spanned multiple star systems. Intelligence gathered from Zephyrian defectors revealed that the Empire controlled over 800 worlds through fear rather than loyalty. Most subject species had surrendered without fighting because they believed resistance was impossible. The revelation that changed everything came when Maria Santos interrogated a high-ranking Zephyrian prisoner who broke down and confessed the truth about the Empire. Every conquered species was told they were facing an unstoppable force that had never been defeated, but the reality was that most worlds surrendered after seeing recordings of other planets being destroyed. The Zephyrians had been conquering. Through psychological warfare, rather than military superiority, Steve Collins commanded the Earth Liberation Fleet as it struck at Zephyrian outposts throughout their territory using tactics that had been perfected during the long war for Earth. Human forces appeared without warning, destroyed their targets, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The aliens had never faced enemies who could move freely through their own territory. The first liberated world was a planet called Kepler Prime, where the native species had been enslaved for 3 centuries. Jake Morrison led the assault, while Maria Santos coordinated with underground resistance movements that had waited generations for someone to show them that the Zephyrians could be defeated. The liberation took just 6 days and sent shockwaves throughout the Empire. News of Kepler Prime's freedom spread through quantum communication networks that the Zephyrians could not control. Subject species who had accepted their fate for hundreds of years suddenly began asking questions about human tactics and technology. Underground movements that had been dormant for centuries started planning their own rebellions. Lisa Harper established the Galactic Liberation Council as a forum where freed species could coordinate their efforts against Zephyrian control. The organization grew from 3 founding members to over 50 in just 6 months as world after world broke free from Imperial domination. Human advisors taught alien resistance fighters the guerrilla tactics that had proven so effective on Earth. The intelligence network that humanity built throughout Zephyrian space revealed weaknesses that no single species could have exploited alone. The Empire maintained control through a complex system of treaties, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts, but all of these arrangements assumed that no one would ever challenge Zephyrian military supremacy. Supreme Commander Vexhai found himself fighting the first multi-front war in Zephyrian history as rebellions erupted on dozens of worlds simultaneously. His military doctrine had been designed to suppress individual uprisings, but could not cope with coordinated resistance across hundreds of star systems. Every ship sent to crush one rebellion left another world vulnerable to attack. Jake Morrison discovered that void fighters could be adapted for interstellar combat by incorporating Zephyrian jump drive technology with human tactical innovations. The resulting vessels could strike at targets throughout the galaxy and return to base before enemy forces could respond. Zephyrian installations that had operated safely for millennia suddenly found themselves under constant threat. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces became catastrophic as defeat followed defeat in battles they had expected to win easily. Alien soldiers who had joined the military to serve a glorious empire found themselves retreating from enemies they had been taught to consider primitive. Desertion rates climbed as entire units abandoned their posts rather than face human-led coalition forces. Maria Santos led joint human-alien military units in operations that would have been impossible just years earlier. Former enemies fought side by side using combined tactics that drew on the strengths of multiple species. The diversity that the Zephyrians had tried to suppress through conquest became the foundation of their defeat. The economic warfare that Lisa Harper coordinated proved as effective as military action in undermining Zephyrian control. Trade routes that had supplied the Empire for centuries were disrupted by human privateers and alien rebels working together. Resource worlds that had fed the Imperial war machine declared independence and stopped shipping raw materials to core Zephyrian. Systems Steve Collins established training academies where human military advisors taught alien species how to organize effective resistance movements. The curriculum included everything from guerrilla tactics to advanced weaponry, but the most important lesson was always the same. No empire was truly invincible if its subjects refused to remain conquered. The breakthrough that sealed the empires. Fate came when human scientists working with alien defectors successfully reverse-engineered the quantum communication system that held Zephyrian space together. Suddenly, the rebels could coordinate their activities across the galaxy, while Imperial forces found their own communications disrupted by sophisticated jamming techniques. Jake Morrison led the assault on the Zephyrian Military Academy, where future officers had been trained for over 1,000 years. The symbolic victory demonstrated that humans were not just defeating individual enemy units, but dismantling the very institutions that had made conquest possible. Young Zephyrians, who might have become the next generation of Imperial commanders instead, witnessed the collapse of everything they had been taught to believe. The final collapse began when core Zephyrian worlds started declaring neutrality, then continue supporting a war effort that seemed increasingly hopeless. Planets that had been loyal to the Empire for millennia chose independence over association with a government that could no longer protect them from human-led coalition forces. Lisa Harper received the surrender offer from Supreme Commander Vexhai during a council meeting on liberated Kepler Prime. The Zephyrian leader proposed a negotiated peace that would allow his species to retain control of their home system in exchange for abandoning all conquered territory. The offer was rejected unanimously by representatives of over 100 worlds that had suffered under Imperial rule. Maria Santos coordinated the final assault on the Zephyrian home fleet as it retreated to defend their core worlds. The battle that followed lasted 3 months and ended with the complete destruction of the Imperial war machine that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years. Survivors were offered sanctuary on liberated worlds if they renounced conquest and embraced cooperation. The war officially ended when the last Zephyrian stronghold surrendered to coalition forces led by human commanders who had learned their trade in the ruins of Earth's cities. Supreme Commander Vexhai was captured alive and faced trial for crimes against sentient species. His empire had fallen not to superior technology, but to the simple human refusal to accept defeat. Steve Collins stood in the council chambers of what had been the Zephyrian capital and watched representatives from 800 worlds sign the Treaty of Liberation. The document established principles of cooperation and mutual defense that would prevent any single species from dominating the galaxy. The age of conquest was ending, and the age of cooperation was about to begin. The message that went out to every world in known space was carried by human ships but spoke for all free species. The galaxy had learned that empires built on fear and oppression contained the seeds of their own destruction. Any future tyrants would face not just individual resistance, but coordinated opposition from species that had learned to value freedom above security. 5 years after the fall of the Zephyrian Empire, Lisa Harper stood in the rebuilt city of Geneva, addressing representatives from 300 worlds that had joined the Galactic Federation. The organization she had helped create was nothing like the empire that had preceded it. Instead of conquest and domination, the Federation was built on principles of cooperation and mutual defense that ensured no single species could threaten the freedom of others. Jake Morrison commanded the Federation Defense Fleet from his flagship as it patrolled the outer rim of known space. The ships under his command were crewed by dozens of different species working together, using technologies that combined the best innovations from across the galaxy. The diversity that empires had tried to suppress through conquest had become the foundation of unprecedented prosperity and advancement. The rebuilding of Earth had taken 3 years and cost the lives of billions of people, but the planet that emerged was stronger than the world the Zephyrians had tried to conquer. Cities rose from the ashes, incorporating architectural styles from freed worlds, while memorial gardens marked the sites where humanity had made its desperate stand against impossible odds. Maria Santos established the Federation Military Academy, where officers from every member species learned the tactics and strategies that had brought down the greatest empire in galactic history. The curriculum emphasized adaptability, innovation, and the importance of understanding that every species brought unique strengths to military cooperation. No single approach to warfare could prepare defenders for every possible threat. Steve Collins had retired from active military service, but continued to serve as an advisor to the Federation Council on matters of strategic planning and defense coordination. His experience commanding multi-species forces during the Liberation Wars made him one of the most respected military theorists in the galaxy. Young officers studied his campaigns as examples of how determination could overcome technological disadvantage. The economic transformation that followed the empire's collapse created opportunities that had been impossible under Zephyrian rule. Trade routes that had once carried tribute to imperial worlds now connected independent planets in networks of mutual benefit. Technologies that had been restricted to the ruling species were shared freely among Federation members, creating innovation at unprecedented rates. Dr. Lisa Harper's research teams worked with scientists from hundreds of worlds to develop new technologies that no single species could have created alone. Medical advances that combined human adaptability with alien knowledge saved lives throughout the galaxy, while engineering breakthroughs made interstellar travel safer and more efficient than ever before. The first test of the Federation's principles came when long-range sensors detected a massive fleet approaching from the galactic core. The ships belonged to the Hegemony, another conquest empire that had been expanding in the opposite direction, while the Zephyrians controlled this region of space. Their advanced scouts broadcast the familiar ultimatum demanding immediate surrender. Of all inhabited worlds, Jake Morrison received the enemy transmission while conducting training exercises with Federation forces near the frontier. The alien commander speaking from the flagship looked remarkably similar to Supreme Commander Vexhai, despite belonging to a completely different species. The attitude was identical, and the threats were almost word for word what humanity had heard years earlier during their own invasion. The response that went out to the Hegemony fleet was not transmitted from Earth alone, but from every Federation world simultaneously. Maria Santos coordinated the broadcast, while Steve Collins ensured that the message reached every corner of known space. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 300 worlds and hundreds of species united in common purpose. We are the Galactic Federation, and we do not kneel to anyone or anything. Our space is defended by species who have learned that freedom is worth any price and cooperation is stronger than conquest. If you come in peace, you will be welcomed as friends. If you come as conquerors, you will discover what happened to the last empire that made that mistake. The Hegemony commander dismissed the warning as empty bluster from primitives who did not understand the reality of superior force. His species had conquered over 1,000 worlds, using tactics that had never failed against any enemy. The fleet that approached Federation space was larger and more advanced than anything the Zephyrians had ever deployed. Lisa Harper coordinated the defense while maintaining diplomatic contact with Hegemony forces in hopes that war could be avoided. Intelligence gathered by Federation scouts revealed that the enemy empire used the same psychological tactics that had made the Zephyrians so effective. Most species surrendered after witnessing demonstrations of overwhelming force rather than face the destruction of their worlds. The first battle began when Hegemony forces attacked an Outer Rim colony expecting easy victory against defenders they assumed would break and run like every other species they had encountered. Instead, they found themselves facing coordinated resistance from multiple species using tactics that had been perfected during years of warfare against the Zephyrian Empire. Jake Morrison led Federation forces in hit-and-run attacks that reminded observers of the desperate early days of Earth's resistance. But these were not desperate survivors fighting with salvaged equipment, but professional military units using advanced hybrid technologies and sophisticated coordination techniques. The Hegemony had superior numbers, but the Federation had learned how to make every ship and every life count. Maria Santos organized resistance movements on worlds that fell to initial Hegemony assaults using techniques that had proven effective against previous conquerors. The enemy found themselves controlling empty cities, while the real war was fought by invisible enemies who struck without warning and vanished before retaliation could be organized. The psychological impact on Hegemony forces became obvious as their easy conquest turned into a grinding war of attrition against enemies who refused to follow expected patterns of behavior. Alien soldiers who had expected garrison duty on conquered worlds instead found themselves hunting ghosts through abandoned cities and empty space. Steve Collins analyzed Hegemony tactics and discovered the same weaknesses that had doomed the Zephyrian Empire. The enemy relied on centralized command structures and standardized responses that became predictable once Federation forces understood the underlying patterns. Innovation and adaptation were foreign concepts to military doctrines that had remained unchanged for millennia. The turning point came when Federation forces successfully liberated the first Hegemony-conquered world using a combination of military action and psychological warfare. Subject species, who had accepted their fate for generations, suddenly realized that the supposedly invincible empire could be defeated by enemies who refused to surrender. Lisa Harper established contact with underground resistance movements throughout Hegemony space and discovered that the pattern was repeating itself on a galactic scale. Species that had been conquered centuries earlier were beginning to question their oppression, while others were preparing for liberation wars that would free them from imperial control. The final victory took 2 years of coordinated fighting across dozens of star systems, but ended with the complete collapse of another conquest empire. The Hegemony fleet that had seemed unstoppable was destroyed or captured while their subject worlds declared independence and applied for Federation membership. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship as the last enemy stronghold surrendered to Federation forces. The battle had been won not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple refusal of free species to accept domination. The galaxy was learning that conquest empires carried within themselves the seeds of their own destruction. The treaty ceremony that followed was held on Earth in the same city where humanity had first defied alien conquest. Representatives from over 500 worlds signed documents that established new principles of galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. The age of empires was ending, and the age of federation was beginning. Maria Santos addressed the assembled delegates with words that summarized everything the galaxy had learned during years of liberation wars. No species was superior to any other, and no empire was strong enough to stand against united free peoples who valued liberty above security. The universe was large enough for every species to find their own path among the stars. The message that went out to unexplored regions of space carried both warning and promise. Any future conquerors would face not scattered individual worlds, but a united federation of species that had learned to fight together. But those who came in peace would find friends and allies ready to share the wonders of a galaxy where freedom had finally triumphed over oppression. The children born on Earth after the liberation would grow up in a universe where conquest was a relic of the past, and cooperation was the foundation of interstellar civilization. They would inherit a galaxy where the human refusal to kneel had become the cornerstone of freedom for hundreds of species who had learned that no one was ever too small to make a difference.